Welcome to the Scalable Cities Cafés. We have a second series of the cafe this year. This is focused on our expert sessions, and today we will be talking about replicating smart cities solutions in small and medium-sized cities. As you probably know, Scalable Cities is an initiative of the European Commission to support smart cities and communities projects and help them identify and promote solutions and find ways of scaling them up across Europe, from what is called pilot cities and lighthouse cities through fellow cities until multiplier cities that are actually looking up to the piloted solutions and trying to replicate them and scale them up. And since replication is also the core theme of our sessions today, so you have a lot to learn and listen to from today's session. Scalable Cities is a really, truly city-led community. At the time of this recording, we count 142 unique cities as a part of our community, and they are divided between 48 lighthouse cities, 73 fellow cities, and 40 pet cities. If that does not add up to the total number, that is because some of them have actually successfully already piloted their solutions and have then become also pet cities. Some of them also went from being fellow cities to then lighthouse cities in later years. So this is really the proof that the replication and collaboration that is so unique to the Scalable Cities community is really working and is helping also scaling up of the solutions across Europe. As I said, the community is quite large. It is counting now 28 projects, including the newest addition in 2024. There were 8 pet projects that have added and is continuing to collaborate, exchange, and share knowledge to really better replicate and scale up solutions. That is why we are also here today. We are sharing some of this knowledge with you with the Scalable Cities Café. And we are going to be talking, as I said, about replicating smart city solutions. The Scalable Cities Cafés are here so that you can really learn from the experts that have also analyzed and looked at all of the community projects and solutions, but you can also engage with them in discussions. The Scalable Cities Cafés are here to be more interactive, and they're here also to exchange ideas, to share your expertise, and to showcase also what your issues are, and ask our experts what their experience is and what their learning is from the community. So don't hesitate to please raise your hands and ask questions. We will also have a dedicated Q&A at the end. This is the second series of the Scalable Cities Cafés. We are starting the expert sessions. So we already had one on innovation procurement. Today, we're talking about replicating smart city solutions. There is another one planned for energy communities, and we have urban digital twins, enabling PCEDs and empowering cities with AI in the pipeline. These will all be happening until the end of December 2024, and we will, of course, inform you about the exact times once they are set. A couple of house rules. This meeting is recorded, so please note that by attending, you are giving us also the consent to then distribute this recording via YouTube, and it will be placed then on the event page. The event page is on the LinkedIn of Scalable Cities and also on the Scalable Cities website, which is placed on the Commission servers. As I said, at the end of the discussion with the experts, there will be also a Q&A, and so we encourage you to please ask questions, share your inputs and insights with our experts. You can raise your hand by pushing on the small button that shows like that, and we will see your hand, and you can talk. So let me not talk too much longer. We have the three experts with whom you want to share your questions and who want to also showcase the knowledge that they have gathered. We have Trevor Gibson from UrbanDNA, Francesco Papa, who's a smart city doer, and Colclough, who is also from UrbanDNA. I will give the word to them very shortly, and I'm sure that they are very excited to be here with you as well. If you can think about the report or about the research that you have done across the Scalable Cities community, maybe let's start with a couple of general questions. Can you define what is the role of small and medium-sized cities in climate neutrality? Have you looked at how do you define the small and medium-sized cities, and what is their role in this important struggle towards climate neutrality in Europe and all the ambitious goals that we have set?
Yeah, interesting question. How do you define a city? I mean, that in itself is bad enough. Trying to figure out what a small one is a different affair. And in fact, Trevor and I, as part of the Small Giants initiative, which Trevor chairs, have been wrestling with that for a while. And we've been very pragmatic in terms of how we tackled it. And it's not really so much about the size only, it's also about the ambition. And that relates also to the strengths of small cities. But broadly speaking, we've said small cities or small and medium cities are things which are under 300,000, which is just at the break-even point to being significant. And small would be, you know, less than what, 50,000 or thereabouts. And what's most important in my view about that is that is where most people live. So we neglect smaller cities at our peril. If we want to reach 2030 goals, 2050 goals, the focus needs to be on smaller cities. And the reason is three big findings that pop out from the work we've been doing recently, which is more specific to the East and Southeast, but also the Small Giants activity. Small cities, in terms of the challenges they face, they can't get all the money for a variety of different reasons. They don't have the capacity in breadth and depth. They have it in spot things. And they can't get the visibility, and they can't make a real impact with the market, the supply market. So those are the blockers, those are the challenges, the major ones. In the work we've been doing more recently, looking at the East and Southeast of Europe, there are different challenges that add to that. The counter to that is there's huge strengths in small cities. Number one, they're really close to society. They're a bit more trusted. You know, the mayor walks down a small city, everybody knows him or her, and that's not necessarily the case. So by being close to society, change and transformative change will occur when people decide they're actually going to be part of that journey. So the need to be very close to society is vital. So that's number one. Number two is agility. Big cities are horribly complicated. Small cities are also horribly complicated, by the way, but at least it's easier to put an acupuncture pin into a small city and see the impact of that quite rapidly. So decision-making is a lot faster in smaller cities. So there's some really important strengths that can be exploited as part of that. I'll pause at that, and I'm sure that Trevor and Francesco may wish to add in some thoughts.
Yeah, I'll just come in on what Graham said. Yeah, it was very clear very early on in our considerations around small to medium-sized cities that small is a different in relation to whatever country you're speaking to. And the term city sometimes, versus villages, towns, and so on, again, terms that are used differently. So to engage with different communities, as Graham said, we adopted a fairly pragmatic approach. It was more about that desire and willingness to collaborate with others, and the size was less of an issue, as Graham has said. I think the other thing that I quite like about projects at small city scale is that it's quite possible to test things out. It's quite possible to design something that in a larger city would be a pilot affecting part of a suburb or whatever. In a small city, the fairly obviously the same scale of project could be transformational. And we, again, very early on in our considerations, really like the idea of building solutions for and with small cities, and for those to be scaled up, because the typical way that cities have in the past devised projects or identified projects and solutions is they look what big cities have done and they break a bit off, and that's not always the most efficient or effective way. Whereas we think building for small and scaling up to larger cities, if that could be the change of emphasis, would be a really exciting way to go.
Yeah, so a practical example of that is in larger cities, they're putting in low emission zones. And there's, I think, 50 or more cities around Europe that are doing that at the moment, specifically to try and arrive at net zero climate neutrality. For a small city, that's not really relevant. So in other words, the design, the actual action that you take may be very different between something that's small and something that's large. And I think that recognition that it's not a case of everything comes from the big ones because they're doing it. This is the opportunity to actually get the smaller ones to be able to take action, because they are representing such a large population, and do it fast and do it well. Twice as good in half the time for half as much.
Maybe one quick addition to the topic of small and medium cities, which for me feels very important. It's not only the biggest segment, it's also where people want to live. When you look at big cities and you compare in terms of quality of life what small and medium cities can offer, it's always a better spectrum here. And I think that's also with COVID and all the the different crises that we had in the past. There's a wake-up call at the moment with this reborn of secondary cities, and I think this is very important, because if people feel living in this type of places, we need to definitely give some attention to that. And I would like to quote actually a famous French writer, Marguerite Duras, that say basically a good city, it's a city that a children can turn around by walking. And I think that's it's a good way to put it in terms of what the right size is. Basically a children that can turn around the city by walking.
Yeah.
Thank you. I love the quote, and it reminds me a bit of the 15-minute walkable city as a great metaphor for that. I would like to drill a bit further into the role of small and medium-sized cities in climate neutrality. You have already a bit touched upon that by saying that not all the solutions that are being implemented in large cities can be directly translated and replicated in smaller ones. So are there any types of solutions that are being specifically put in place in the small and medium-sized cities, specifically for reaching climate neutrality, and how do they differ from scope to scale, etc.?
I think there are. I mean, can you understand the pattern of everything that's going on in every size of city in Europe? Of course not. So this is only the impression that one gets. What I'd like to draw out first, actually, would be the point of small places. You can actually step outside into the hinterland, into the rural areas. So there's a stronger connection between smaller cities and the peri-urban areas and the rural activities. And so things which are about net zero and climate neutrality, things which are about biodiversity, things which are about agriculture and the connection between nature and agriculture and food and such like into smaller cities sort of feels very natural as opposed to big city. I've got 4 supermarkets and within 5 minutes walk of me. So in terms of where I believe smaller cities can thematically more naturally engage with topics which are about climate, I think the nature side is a very, very strong axis. To the question of other things which small cities are doing, which large cities would not necessarily do, that's possible. I think we're currently working on mobility as a very practical example. I would see small cities could do it better, maybe, in many ways, in terms of doing it in a very human way, looking at placemaking, as opposed to the kind of technical transport engineering mindset that you have in big cities that have got to manage flows of enormous volumes of people through public transport, through stations and such like. I think smaller cities have the ability to look at it in a more joined up way, in a very much more human way. So I think they're both doing the same thing, but how they're approaching it and the end impact between small and large may well be different. And that for me is quite exciting, because I want a place that is nice to live in, to Francesco's point, as opposed to something which is just purely efficient. And I think the smaller communities can actually, because of the fact they're smaller and they're looking at it holistically, this isn't just an initiative on a theme like mobility or buildings, it's actually placemaking all the time, if that makes sense.
I think as well that just stepping back from specific project ideas, Graham mentioned in his response to the earlier question about how in small cities communities are closer, they're smaller places, you can walk around them, using the quote that Francesco shared. Being closer to your communities as a city and your citizens, I think is quite a powerful thing when you come to climate neutrality, because as we all know, whether you're targeting businesses, whether you're targeting schools, individuals, communities as a group, it all boils down to behavior change. So, whether you're a company director or a school child walking or busing to work, to school, it all boils down to behavior change. And if you're closer to your communities, if you're more in touch and understand your communities in a more granular way, you're far more likely to be able to influence and in some instances drive the change required. That's not always something that's available in larger cities with huge populations, but I think there's a lot to be learned from smaller cities in those larger cities about that community and citizen engagement piece.
You mentioned type of solutions, so probably to give maybe a few examples, maybe one example for me that really stand out from the smaller community of cities, I think it's energy. Energy is obviously a big thematic, and I think because of the high cost and the fact that a high cost for small cities just means something we need to change right now, because they have such a budget burden compared to bigger cities. And I think this has been a driver for change in many small cities, and we have in fact actually a good example of a region in Poland that have basically scale out PV on the roof of the houses for, like, I think a collective of cities, which I think it's very impressive to do this collectively. So I will say energy is actually a great topic where we see often stuff a bit more advanced in smaller communities actually.
Thank you for this great example, and you have literally anticipated the next question, because I want to drill a bit deeper into what are the concrete solutions and advantages of the of small and medium-sized cities as opposed to the large cities, and is there any way that you can mention some of the great examples, like the energy one, that have been already, for example, even initially designed for a larger city and then been more successfully replicated in the small and medium-sized cities? Or if you have any other also examples on how they can be an example and drive an example of implementing great solutions.
Yeah. I'd maybe kick off with a few scene-setting things around this, which relates to work that's been going on, a number of different European projects going on at the moment. Our view is if you're not focused on four thematic areas, you're not tackling climate neutrality. And those four areas are the built environment, mobility, waste, and energy. Energy underpins all the first three, and they represent probably well north of 80%, if not 90% of the GHGs in a city. So tackling those must be part of a plan. And that roadmap that a city puts together is really important. And I think many cities of all sizes are struggling to actually put that roadmap together in terms of a coherent way of dealing with an interdependent set of systems. They've been managing systems in their silos, and now they need to manage it in a different way. So that shift in terms of organizing, what do we do to get to net zero, is challenge number one. The second point is what solutions. There are so many examples. They're like fireworks going off. When you see the firework, it looks great. You get all excited, and then it drops to the ground, and you go, oh, what happens next? And we have that kind of firework display around Europe all the time, and we don't need that. We need to actually tackle it systemically. We need to codify, we need to blueprint solutions so they can be scaled up. And that is where is the opportunity and the real issue for smaller cities. Remember, they don't have the capacity and depth and breadth. They can't get access to the market, and they don't have the money. So that's the blocker. Yet they're close to society. They are far more prone to collaborate than big cities that beat their chest and say, we are the best. They really want to collaborate. And I think that's the opportunity that we're currently addressing. So from the roadmap, which is how do you get this discombobulated mess of things and make sense out of it, step number one, we've been mapping probably, I'm looking at it now, but 30 different potential solutions in terms of how complicated they may be. Now, in a smaller city, they're going to be less complicated to implement. They'll still be complicated, and that's important, versus another thing, which is bankability. And that's really important because all of the projects and the scalable projects, all the Lighthouse programs and such like, they were not overtly and explicitly tasked to scale up. It was kind of a nice to have. They were tasked to demonstrate something good, and that's a good thing. The codification of that, such that it could be scaled up, was something that very few of those programs have really worked on. And I think that that is the opportunity for Europe, to codify solutions in a way that you're codifying functionally, not physically. I keep on using the example of the iPhone. That is the smartphone. An iPhone is a particular version of it, but a smartphone is functionally something that you can describe. Now, if you can describe it functionally, you then create innovation, you create a competitive market, and you can then move forward with that. But smaller cities struggle to actually describe it. We've identified 7 solutions that we think are reasonably implementable in terms of not being too complicated, and most importantly, are bankable. And all the focus of the Lighthouse programs have been on technical aspects of things. We need to shift, while societal and technical, we need to shift the thinking towards business models and financing, which is why we mapped these 30 or so solutions against bankability. It came up with 7 that we said, these feel like things that it would make sense to move forward with. Most notably because they either are things that people do on a daily basis, like move. So mobility is got to be one, because everybody does it every day, and they do it physically, as opposed to energy, which they pay for once a month and maybe don't even realize they paid for it because it's just taken off their bank balance. So I think mobility is absolutely one, and within that broader area there are a number of different solutions you can focus on. There's one specific one which we're working at the moment, which is the concept of mobility islands. Now in Europe we call them mobility hubs, intermodal exchanges, e-hubs. That's not a bad thing, but that's very technical and transport engineering focused. By calling them islands, you're actually starting to think about things which are about experience, pleasure, smiling, sunshine, and placemaking. And mobility islands are a means by which you can shift and transform habits around moving around a city. And in smaller cities, you can probably do that faster. What's most important and what's happened already is that 20 small cities around Europe have actually said, where would we put these mobility islands? And they're starting to collaborate around seeking to do something together. Collaboration, common functional designs, which will create scale, that will attract the market. And the key thing is, how do we scribe out business models and financing mechanisms to actually cause that to happen? And this is about balancing, shall we say, the one-size-fits-all approach to life, which isn't the answer, to let's start from first principles, which also isn't the answer. So somewhere between those two ends of the spectrum is an appropriate means by which you can codify solutions that can be reconstructed for the specific nature of each of the cities. So I think mobility is definitely an area that we should be working on, and there are a number of different solutions in there. I think that that energy, and particularly renewables, PV, heat pumps, shared solutions around that in terms of district heating and such like is another one that's really important. And I think waste, I mentioned that because though it's not a major contributor in terms of CO2 and GHGs, it's something that everybody does on a daily basis. And it's something that people are more and more worried about, microplastics and the relation between that and other diseases and such like. So it's starting to get in from the head to the heart to the gut in terms of actual action by real people in real places.
Yeah, I'll just add a few things to that. Graham's covered a lot there already. For me, there's some very basic and fairly obvious, I guess, advantages of replication and adapting, particularly in the small cities community. It builds that knowledge base. So the more cities of whatever scale that try things, adapt things, it builds that knowledge base. That in itself builds confidence, because smaller cities, again, particularly risk averse, because resources are even tighter than they are in larger cities usually. So getting that confidence, seeing what other small, medium-sized cities are doing, particularly where collaboration is involved, not just with other cities, but with a variety of businesses and business model approaches. It all builds confidence, builds momentum, and hopefully the shift towards net zero gathers pace, builds momentum as a result. I'll just give a couple of examples from my part of the UK and the projects that I'm involved in on the periphery now, but was involved very much in the establishment of the projects. In Peterborough, which is a small city, sort of central England, if you like. A bit like Graham said, it's very close to its rural areas. The rural areas are within its boundary of jurisdiction, so it has to have regard to those areas. They're not in a neighbouring rural authority. But two particular projects focused on energy, which I find quite exciting and may or may not be as easy to do in larger cities. So there's a lot of learning to be gained. One is around heat pumps and the rollout of heat pumps, particularly into rural communities. So how do you get people more aware of the advantages, the art of the possible, to become more interested in these newer technologies, and so that you can have a real impact in and amongst those rural communities, particularly. They're often harder to reach. And another one, not a million miles away in terms of idea, is a local heat network. And again, because Peterborough's centre, at least, is quite compact, so the industrial and commercial side is very close to residential, is very close to the city centre with its shopping streets and shopping malls. is to use waste heat from the energy from waste. So it links back into Graham's point about what happens to waste and engaging people on that subject. So using that waste heat to channel it through some of the key streets in the city and start to provide cost-effective heating, in some cases small-scale energy production, into some of the commercial and retail premises in that side of the city. So two very good examples, which for a city the size of Peterborough will be transformational in time, and from which other cities can learn, and certainly bigger cities can learn in the future as well.
Maybe to pick up on a few points already mentioned, but also to bring a different perspective here. So indeed, I think there's no doubt here that replicating to smaller communities is important. However, I think there is a distinction to be made with bigger cities in terms of how we replicate that into smaller cities, because we need to consider this community as also a different, variety of needs. And typically, yesterday I was in Cannes. There was a Salon des Maires of Cannes in France with the smaller cities around Cannes, and many smaller cities are basically cities in surviving mode. Which means that they have, very few capacity, very few budget, and they have very specific needs. And I think this is common across many small cities. And this has to be, acknowledged in terms of, replicating solution in their context, which is why I think the city context, picking up on Graham's point, is also important to make sure we tweak some solution into the local context. And maybe, so I think two quick advantages to emphasize on a few points. So the first will be the fact that in a small city, things are visible. And that's easier to engage people, because people can see, a change really happening in a city. And that clearly are advantages to, let's say, that will foster replication of solution into the city. So I think we should really build on this visibility that you have as a small city, and also the engagement. I think you, Graham, mentioned that on your city of 3,000 inhabitants, you submit a survey for people about mobility, and everyone replied about this service. So that's the interesting thing with smaller cities, is that you can really, the people, and that's a force.
Thank you, Francesco. I really like how you touch upon several of the issues, but also advantages of the small and medium-sized cities. When I'm thinking about a small or medium-sized city, I'm also thinking about how the administration is a lot less robust, potentially, hopefully, than in a larger city. And with that, I would guess that the replication and scaling up of solutions, or just pure implementation of solutions, should actually happen on a much quicker time scale. Do you have any kind of examples to say whether I am right or not, whether the small and medium-sized cities do have greater agility and greater flexibility in implementing these solutions? Are they, let's say, quicker and more successful in implementing them, or is that just my idea that does not root anywhere in the actual results of the research?
They are chameleon, I think. Indeed, now they like to. I think adaptation, it's one of their key assets in small cities. And in fact, I do have an example. Sorry to jump in, but I have really a good example of things that I see, for example, in my country, in France, that working very well for smaller cities. So, usually in most city markets, you need to, when you procure things, you need to do a public tender up to a certain amount. And that's indeed a big thing for some cities, to pull out some specification for what they need to buy. And as soon as you become smaller, obviously this become a bigger task. And in France, there's a procurement body that is very famous called UGAP, which I think honestly has helped so much smaller cities to basically procure things without the need to do tender procurement, which really makes the decision much faster, but also the ability to procure yourself with an amount of things become suddenly easier. And I think that's for me a kind of a quick wins to implement in each market to really make this procurement aspect easier, because at the end of the day, that's a big bureaucracy. And as we move to Southeast and East Europe, I think this is becoming even bigger as a topic.
I think, Veronica, your question isn't answered by size. Your question is answered by the ability of a city to have a functional operating and governance model. And so there are examples of big cities that are elephants that move quite dancefully, if you like. And there's examples of small cities that are doing appallingly in terms of having absolutely a sense of abject, I give up. We're too small, we're not in control of our destiny, so let's just have it done to us. However, there are also examples of really aggressive, or even, no, aggressive is the wrong word, a very assertive small cities in terms of what they want to do, very deterministic, moving forward. I mean, one of a number of really good examples, which we hold up, and Trevor will know exactly who I'm going to talk about now, is Kran. And Kran is in Slovenia. It's a modest-sized city of 57,000 or something, close and passionately led by a mayor who is recognized nationally, has got 100% support politically, and they've got a very competent, very commercially minded group of officers. So as a city that's well governed with an operating model, they're incredibly agile and they move at pace. So I'd hold that up as an example of a small city with really good governance. There are big cities with good governance also. Alas, governance is not necessarily, it's complicated, and it's not necessarily something that all cities are particularly good at, but they need to be an awful lot better in order to reach the goals, which are now getting harder and harder year by year for us to meet. So there's no question of, let's just carry on. We absolutely have to look at all systems, be they service delivery systems and infrastructure, or the enabling aspects, and get better. And I would posit, because we haven't really spent enough time on this, the need to actually understand how can you make something attractive for an investor, be that investor public or private or a mix, or indeed the community, and how can you evidence through measurement the value that comes from that in a variety of different ways. That is, I think, the contemporary topic that we need to be addressing in cities these days. No longer just the technical, what's the widget that will bolt in place and get excited about. We've got to be able to say, how can you get that a lot cheaper? And this is where, specific to smaller cities, by aggregating demand, you can shift and access financing that you could not get before, and you get a few bips better on the cost of the money. And that's not a bad thing for a long-term loan, maybe. The most important thing is by aggregating demand, you can get double-digit savings on the price. And by the way, you probably get a product which is more secure, robust, more common. It's going to be cheaper maintenance. So the transformative potential on the money side is enormous. What we need to do is to be able to actually access that money by being able to show that we can evidence competent measurement, not precise, but accurate measurement that will demonstrate to whoever it is that's investing that it's worthwhile bothering about. And that's where I think the real opportunity, quantum opportunity, is for the smaller cities by aggregation.
Just a very few things to add to those the comments made so far. Yeah, I agree entirely with the concept here that that smaller cities are by definition agile, and we've talked about many of the reasons for that in response to earlier questions. I would also go back to Francesco's point that many small cities, many large cities, are in survival mode, and agility and flexibility, all the excitement can soon dissipate, as Graham's described, if you just simply don't have the resources even to take out the loans you need to implement some of this. So that's a real test of character, of innovation, one's ability to innovate and stay positive through very, very difficult times for cities. So that agility is there, but to progress, you still need to have the resources, people and financial.
Great, thank you. I really liked how you already mentioned a couple of examples, very concrete, of the city of Trent and what are the successful factors actually for the city. And charismatic mayor seems to be one of them. The other one would be then a business-oriented team around him. And then collaboration and aggregating the demand so that they can actually overcome maybe the drawback of being a small city in their demand. Is there any other example that you can think of that you would like to mention at this point to really give as a key example of what you have seen, and whether there are any lessons learned or any good best practices to be drawn from that also for other cities at this point?
Yeah.
If I could just start on that one, I think the successful examples we've given a few in relation to Peterborough, Crans, the cities in France that Francesco described as doing things differently. For me, the common factor in all of that, apart from charismatic mayors, which are few and far between often in my experience, is the societal engagement. You can have all the ideas in the world, but as I mentioned in response to an earlier question, it boils down to behavior change, and people need to be bought into why you're doing these things. So some of them are not easy changes in one's lifestyle, particularly when you're talking about net zero. So, not having my car, getting on a bus, all of these things, have an impact on one's life. So that societal engagement, the input, and by that I mean, valued and input where people are not just asked and ignored, but they actually participate in the design. You face them with the challenges of engaging with the communities and let them help you break through and build that momentum. It's particularly relevant in relation to the heat pump project in Peterborough, because approaching people individually with heat pumps, I don't understand it. I've heard they're expensive. I've heard they don't work in certain types of property. So the conversation gets shut down very quickly. What's happening in that Peterborough example is they're working very closely with the parish councils, with community groups, with people that are working with the most vulnerable and deprived communities in those rural areas, and just building a momentum and a knowledge and an awareness around this one particular technology, but hopefully that awareness is transferable to others.
I'd add to that, because you picked on the topic I was thinking about there, Trevor, and I'd add to that the opportunity, and this is a transformative opportunity, to keep it very, very real. Francesco mentioned a recent survey. Yes, there was a survey run. It got high response. It took 9 months for the whole overall process of putting it out there, getting responses, analyzing, etc., etc., etc. At the same time, we used a digital tool platform to get an impression from multiple sources of data, ethically managed, and that key word is important, ethically managed, to actually come up with, so what is it that people are doing? Not what's their opinion, because everybody can have an opinion and do have an opinion, but their actions matter. And we used a digital tool, and it gave a more nuanced answer within walkable distances in this small place. So it was far more detailed in the space of, less than 2 days, and some real insight. So the opportunity to speed up and to transform and to improve the quality of information around how would I go about engaging society is a digitalization opportunity, which we must embrace. And there's lots of tools out there which are more associated with commercial or with scoops and such like. But there are a few tools which are ethical. And the example I come to is actually not in Europe, it's in Australia, where they got 20 communities to collaborate around a common use of a platform. And that for me pricks a number of bubbles. The aspect of collaboration amongst small communities and the aspect of using an ethical tool which can transform the relationship between, particularly for smaller places, between the leaders and decision makers and society, to actually shorten that time and discussion and improve the quality of output and the change that can occur. And that for me is the transformative lever that we should be grasping and really, really pulling globally and certainly in Europe to do something about it.
Maybe a final note, Veronica. I would like to pick up on one keyword you mentioned, Graham, which is collaboration. For me, when you speak about small cities, a key thing that came out of it is the power to collaborate amongst other cities, which is far greater success than what I've seen in larger cities. And I have a good example of a community that has built basically a network of smaller cities together, and they are doing great things. And the network I'm referring to is called the CVIM network. And it's a network that started in Nevers, which is a city of 80,000 inhabitants. And that created a network globally across smaller cities that do want to do something, they do want to do innovation, and collaborate more. And I think this is also a great success of not necessarily a project, but actually bringing together the cities of similar size and similar needs, and therefore do something common, which obviously is at the end transformational. So I think this is a key thing for me for small cities.
Thank you, Francesco. And I really like the point on collaboration because it stems from all of your inputs so far. I have a question about citizen engagement, and actually, you spoke at the very beginning that the one key aspect is of the small and medium-sized cities, the closeness to its citizens. Is there any good lessons learned on how to actually do effective citizen engagement? Because especially in some of the pilot cities, we see that sometimes the cities struggle on what is the right way on how to balance the citizen and stakeholder engagement. It seems like the answer would be then in small and medium-sized cities, or at least it seems like they actually answered that question much better and tackled that problem.
Got to say, my view is there's lots of examples of how to not do it very well. There's very few of how to do it well, unfortunately, and that so this is a huge opportunity for us.
Yeah, agreed. Lots of examples of how not to do it. I think the key, and again, there's no simple answer, is being as inclusive as possible. We've all experienced situations where the same views come from the most confident and loudest people in a community, and that becomes, the view of the community if one isn't careful. So it's finding ways to really engage with everybody, from very young people to very old people and everything in between in terms of abilities, sexual orientation, the whole works comes into it. It's very hard to do, but getting it right is absolutely critical, I think.
But I think here, so I all agree with you in terms of, let's say, the messaging here. But I think a key thing that I find on the city market is that it's super difficult to master this topic. And there is not like a single methodology to do it well. It's all dependent on where you are. And I think that's struggles that I've seen in many cities on how to best engage. And sometimes you engage people and you come up with a result because some people didn't participate, and that's why you come up with such an inclusive design at the end. And I think there is definitely a need for perfection here, and especially on finding the right tools, I think, which unfortunately, I think it's still we still need to crack the code here.
There's some basic principles and there's a basic framework that one can use. Unfortunately, when you speak to cities, you don't hear either of those things coming out in the conversation. It becomes very, very bottom up, naturally. It's not on this question, it's on a different one. We haven't talked about the role of government to support smaller cities, and I think that's a key thing as well.
Thank you. I do find that citizen engagement is the everlasting question, and it's very, very hard to actually tackle it right and get the right balance. So it sounds like no matter whether it's a large city or a small city. I've dumped one of the questions on the biggest barriers, just being conscious of the time, because I think we've addressed several of the barriers already. Because I think what could be very interesting is to actually look at the funding opportunities that are there for small and medium-sized cities. You have already started a bit talking about how can they be effective by aggregating demand, and I'd like you to kind of expand a bit more on that, whether there's any good innovative solutions that they are using, or any good strategies on how to do that, and whether they're using the so many times mentioned collaboration in order to actually find good funding opportunities.
Yeah, there are, and that's good news, and we need to do more of it. Think of funding in two senses: public sector funding and private sector funding. So this picks up the government point also. There is a very important role of government to actually stimulate demand aggregation, to set competitions, which does not mean one winner and lots of losers. It's actually incentivizing and stimulating collaboration and demand aggregation as part of the competition. And that's stimulating activity and de-risking from the public sector with public funds, which create scale, which in itself is efficient. So that's a role of government to do something, and they can help and make sure we don't have a two-speed Europe with big cities leaping forward and small ones struggling. So that's really important from a standpoint of using government funds cleverly. Now let's talk about other funds, and there's, you know, people say, well, let's go to the private sector. There's hundreds, there's many different types of investor with different conditions, and frankly, we don't know enough about that. We need to understand how we can bring the investor to the project, not the project to the investor. We need to draw them in, intrigue them, and that is, again, by creating appropriate scale, appropriate confidence in solution, consistency around some of the things. And if we can create those conditions, then at least you have a solution that looks appealing. And then if you unpick a solution, which is why we talked about mobility, you find solutions where there's revenue potential, or where there's other forms of value that could be, if you wanted to, shadow monetized. They may be strategic, environmental, social benefits, but you can kind of shadow them and engage with purpose-based investors that actually do worry about ESG activities. By aggregating demand and government action, you could create the scale that attracts scale money. By understanding how you can manage value better, you can make it more appealing. By having that sense of commonality and collaboration, you can de-risk it for the investor, that then attracts scale investment funds, because there is no shortage of funds in the market at all. Massive shortage of money spent. So it's about how we manage to mobilize those funds. And that, for me, is the contemporary issue, without any question. And there are examples, I mean, very practical, very tactical, in a region in Italy, where they all got together. I think it was 15 or more municipalities around buying lampposts. I mean, heavens above, that's the simplest of things, at volume, and attracted a substantial investor to actually get involved in those sorts of things. And Francesco mentioned earlier the example in the north of Poland, this Loka region around renewables. We just need more of those. We need more of those.
Thank you very much, Graham. I just want to mention that Francesco had to leave for his other meeting, but we will still continue for a couple more minutes to give you a bit more opportunity to share your research. Trevor.
Yeah, again, not a lot to add to what Graham has said here. That unfortunately there is no magic money tree. It does require governments to prioritise the sorts of topics we're talking about. You know, the competition locally, particularly in small cities where they haven't got the economies of scale to fund the day-to-day, has and always will be the priority. What we're talking about here is the ability through grants, through collaborations, through borrowing and so on, to put packages together that are attractive to the market and do deliver. At the moment, my sense is that the mindset, despite the imperative of net zero, the mindset is still defaults to de-risking and to funding initiatives that have a very quick payback in cash terms, not in carbon terms. And there's a mindset required there for governments, cities, for the public who ultimately will be paying through taxes and local taxes. There's a mindset there that says actually it's not all about the cashable savings, it's about the savings in carbon, and this is the impact of not doing it.
Yeah. There's another thing, and Trevor, we won't mention the city, but there's a particular city who we had a very frank discussion with, small city of around about 30,000 or so. And the officer who is in charge of energy and a variety of different portfolio projects said that the political decision-making was do this, prove it works, come back for more. Do the next one, prove it works, come back for more. And he said, we need to stop doing that sequential projects because that will not deliver 2030 goals. We actually need to manage this as a portfolio, which means we need a different approach to it. But the problems that Trevor's outlined in terms of the daily challenges around decision making are precluding that. So we need an element of bravery, and bravery in a public realm is really difficult, which is why we come back to that aspect of brave leaders that can lead the way, build confidence, help the aggregation process, which obviously needs support from governments to actually mobilize. The other point which is interesting is that a lot of these innovations which will help don't come from big organizations. They come from small SMEs, and quite a few small SMEs are really important to the small cities they exist in, and that's an angle of opportunity to also exploit. And there are some places that are doing that through their economic development strategy, through the way that they're driving innovation within smaller cities, which I think is good to see. Just need an awful lot more of it.
Yeah, it seems like there's a good symbiotic also collaboration, not only between the small and medium-sized cities, but also with their SMEs within the city or within the region. I've seen that also in other examples. I'm going to ask again, since we are at the end of our questions and of our session, and we're going a bit over time, to the audience, whether there are any questions that you would like to share with our experts. And this is a good opportunity to exchange. So all you have to do is just to raise your hand and ask or comment, or maybe you want to give your experience from a city and reflect on what has been said in the session. Now is the time.
And out of interest, Veronica, are you going to put our contact details up there should anybody wish to pick up?
Yes, yes, and we're putting that also on LinkedIn. That way it's a lot easier, also for GDPR reasons.
Yeah, super.
Okay, but if there's no comments or questions, I'm gonna then kind of subscribe that to the richness of the input that you have provided. But of course, if there's any other questions that might pop in your head, we will be posting everything online, so you can also share the questions with us post this session recording. As is kind of usual in the Scalable Cities Cafes, I'm going to ask you for key takeaways and recommendations to our experts, but not to make it too easy and too wordy. I'm going to ask you for 3 keywords. So what are the recommendations if you would that you would give to a city that is looking to replicate a smart city solution in their city, or what are the key takeaways from the research? And I'm looking really for keywords, ideally 3 keywords.
Collaboration, leadership, bankability.
Perfect,
Brave.
thank you.
Yes.
Agility, positivity, and innovation.
Love it.
Great, thank you so much. We have 6 keywords that all the cities can take away with them and prepare their strategy for implementing the solutions there accordingly. So I would like to just promote a bit that this is a series of expert sessions that we are continuing then also at the Smart City Expo World Congress in Barcelona on the 7th of November at the European Commission booth. And if you find the session interesting, come see us there and talk to our experts, maybe more in person. It will be a lot easier to then also exchange and ask questions. I would like to herewith give big thanks to our experts, Trevor Gibson and Colclough from UrbanDNA, and also to Francesco Papa, who had to leave a bit sharp on the hour. And also to our audience that you were here with us. We hope that you find the insights interesting. If you have any further questions, comments, don't hesitate to reach out to us and to our experts. You can stay connected with us via LinkedIn or Twitter. And as a follow-up of this session, you will receive a newsletter with all of the contacts and all of the session recap, plus the recording and the placement where it is. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you, Veronica. Cheers for now then.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.